good to see a great turnout and good to be here. So my name is Paul Hewitt. I look after the overall data analytics practice for Luxoft. So we focus not just on banking and financial services, but also a fairly wide range of different lines of business. So I was very encouraged today to see the talks and listen to some really great talks beforehand. And I think there's quite a lot of common alignment in many of them. So today what I'm hoping to cover is progression through what we call the data journey, and in particular looking at alignment between objectives and business stakeholders, and how we fulfill those main business objectives. So most of what I'm going to be talking about is stuff that we've seen over the years and experiences that we've had. So hopefully I can share some of those with you today. So just to take a very brief step back, and just for fun more than anything else, just to have a quick look at the big picture. And we can't really be truly accurate about these things, but ballpark, looking at some of the survey results and some of the statistics that are out there from internet producers and the like, the volume of data is still growing much faster than people commonly realize. So we had 2 zettabytes more or less in 2010. 2022, we've got 97. And if you look at these statistics, that means a compound annual growth rate of about 34% of data being produced. Right? Most of that data is not used and discarded one way or the other. Another figure there, people obviously trying to make money out of it, say how much revenue these days across the market is being made from big data. It's increasing at about 22%, and the volume of storage is increasing at about 19%. So, big picture, why is everybody interested in the studio function? Why is people pouring more money into data? And they're like, well, this is why. There's much more value in the data, the value is increasing really fast, so the importance of data as a whole, tangibly, this is becoming bigger and bigger to everybody. So my expectation is that it's going to be a fast-growing field, it's going to continue to grow fast, and there's going to be a lot more revenue flowing into it. But the question today really is about what do we see as the challenges in making money out of this rapidly expanding picture? How do we make money? And how do we close that value gap between the amount of data that's being created and the value that we're getting out of it? And I guess what we tend to focus on is those 3 elements there: the volume, managing the volume, how do you manage it? In particular, getting bigger and bigger all the time, how do you automate it? It has to be automated. How do you monetize it ultimately? That's what the business is interested in. And then how do you make sure that that's aligned with the business objectives? So we tend to align this into 3 sort of main groups. There's the management aspect, there's the insight aspect, and then lastly, where the value really comes in, is the advanced analytics. And just perhaps to reinforce the point a little bit, and there's any number of surveys out there that you can have a look at. I've picked 2, but most of them tell more or less the same thing. The surveys are all saying that analytics is a top priority for most people in the technology organizations, and that's perhaps obvious. But to get to the analytics, you've got to have the data, and you've got to have that firm foundation sitting at the bottom of it. And what do you do? What are people interested in? The survey results are tending to shift more and more towards actually generating revenue, as opposed to doing digital transformation, or particular things like intimacy. People want to see the business results now, and that's filtering through, at least according to the surveys, to the data analytics leaders. So there's a clear progression here. People are interested in it, they want to make money out of it, and there's a definite gap. So, how do we approach all of this, and how do we try and make sense of this sort of situation? So, I mentioned earlier there's 3 main categories: the management, the insight, and the advanced analytics. So, the management really is the stuff about getting the data in. Can you get the data in? Do you have standard processes for getting the data in? Somebody, I think it was Brian, mentioned that he had 600 sources at the NYC. If you've got 600 data sources, you have to have a standardized process. If you have 600 separate processes for 600 pieces of data, you're doing the water operation. It's just not going to work, right? And similarly, as he was speaking about, you've got to have your authentication, authorization, entitlement, etc. All of those things are a crucial part of the management aspects. And you'll find that by and large, most people are more or less more or less got an idea about what they need to do on the management side. But for us at the moment, what we see where the rubber really hits the road is on that middle column there, the insight side. And that is all about how do you get the data into a state where you can actually generate reliable insights from it. So we've heard people talking about making sure that the producers of the data are aligned, consumers of the data, you need the data dictionaries and the catalogs and all those good things. But fundamentally, for us, one of the acid tests of all of this is can you take your data, whether it's in a data lake or something else, can you take that and can you give the business users direct access to that on a self-service basis, right? If you can, then that means that your data is correct. And to use Brian's phrase as well, it does what it says on the tin, right? And it's correct, comprehensive, does what it says on the tin. If you can give your business users access to that and they can do their own reporting, their own self-service, their own dashboards, their own whatever, and they can do it reliably and correctly, you've got a major win. And the more people that do it, if you have 15 eyeballs on your data, right, you have a certain level of correctness. Most things are going to be more or less okay. If you have 400 eyeballs on your data, there's very, very little that's going to be wrong with that data. So the more that you can get the business involved with the data directly, the better your data is going to be and the more insights you're going to generate. And then when we talk to clients, oftentimes people think advanced analytics, you need a whole squad of PhDs, and you need lots and lots of incredibly bright technical people who can crunch all these numbers and so forth. These days, relatively speaking, that's not the case so much anymore. There's some really, really good platforms out there that do analytics for you. So relatively speaking, when people start projects, the expectation is that you're going to spend a little bit of time structuring the data and getting it together, and we're going to spend lots of time with PhDs generating advanced models. It's the other way around. Even in this day and age, the really important thing is to get your data models and your data modeling correct. Oftentimes, the advanced analytics side of it you can do with the platforms really, really quickly and really easy. And your challenge with the advanced analytics becomes the usual ones of management, automation, launching of models, and doing all those sorts of things. So what I wanted to focus on today was just the point that each of those stages that you do needs to show value. And that's kind of one of our fundamental ways of making sure that there's alignment with the business. So for example, if you look at the first that management area that we were talking about, can you show that there's direct value to the business when you do it? And there's some examples there I've put up on the screen of areas that we've seen before. So if you can get your straight-through processing up from 65 to 97%, you can well end up with headcount reduction. And that getting the STP in that particular example was a data problem. It wasn't a tech problem or anything else, it was a data problem. Why was it a data problem? Problem because there were, in that particular case, there were about 15, 20 different real-time exchange feeds coming in. Many of them with overlapping data. So the problem was to disambiguate the overlapping concepts and get to one large central trade repository that was correct. Once we had that, most of the work went away for a large team of people doing recs, and then you had big increases in STP, which was great, and they could actually do a headcount reduction as a consequence. We did have, just picking up on, I think Julia's point, somebody's point, I forget, but we did have there was resistance from the actual people in the team who were going, Turkey's don't work for Christmas, right? If there's a potential they're going to lose their jobs, they're going to be antsy, they're not going to be proud. But the way that we got around that particular one was to talk to the people one level up. So you make sure that you involve the team leads and the division leads and say, look, if you do this, you're going to drop your headcount by X. And then you get the push through coming even in the face of some rather awkward conversations. Similarly for the democratization piece, I won't speak too much to that. I think I'll struggle to finish otherwise. But the reg reporting was another really important one, talking about getting a single consistent data model and getting the business involved. That particular one as well was an interesting one. We were told to expect 15 users, which was primarily the compliance team. We ended up with 400 because our organization wanted to use it because it was one source of correct data. And there were 30 or 40 iterations on the data model before we actually started even doing any coding. And those 30 or 40 iterations of the data model involved business in every single design meeting. There was an analyst from the business in every meeting, and actively contributing as well. And then lastly, when all of that was done, to go back to the earlier point, the machine learning side was relatively quick and easy. So it becomes easy to learn machine learning and advanced analytics once you've got a data model that's correct, self-descriptive, does what it says in the term, and all those things. And that is where I believe, we as an industry are not spending quite enough time. So broadly speaking then, what's the approach? So we kind of try and layer, let's say, the value perhaps in a couple of different ways. So firstly, right at the heart of it, you need the platform, the management of the platform. And obviously you're not going to get anywhere if you don't have that sitting at the heart. The second layer of value is the one I've been spending a few minutes talking about now, and that's making sure that the data models are in place and they're correct, comprehensive, and complete. And there are a bunch of different ways you can approach it. And Brian gave a great exposition on a bunch of different ways that you can do that and make sure that you've got a great set of data. And then lastly, the icing on the top is generating the business value out of all of that. The extra value that doesn't sit there necessarily, and that is where you want advanced analytics from machine learning and self-service and so on. So to kind of put it all together, hopefully, what are the three main areas that we see to end up at the end of the data journey? Well, you need great analytics, and oftentimes that's making sure that you have the correct analytics platform, making sure you've got the right data and engineering. So, oftentimes we do make the mistake also of thinking that we're not subject to the same sort of DevOps considerations as software developers have been for all these years, but that's not the case. It's absolutely fundamental that data as a whole, including the models, including everything else, you have the same DevOps and automation processes as you do in normal software development. And more than that, there's a whole bunch of new regs coming in, which everybody, I assume, is aware of. For example, you need to be able to, for audit purposes, reproduce any result that you achieve with an analytics model. So how do you do that? And what do you do if you've got a data set of billions and billions of records? How do you make sure that you can reproduce it? Because if you're going to follow the same principles for data as for data and models as your software, that means you need a copy of the full data set for every model that you produce and you put into production. And that becomes incredibly expensive, right? How do you have a full copy of Facebook's data, for example, every single time? There are tricks and tips around all of that. So, for example, there's what's called bitemporal version. Instead of storing it's basically applying GitHub data. Instead of storing the full data set every time, make sure you store the changes. So if you need to go back in time, you can reproduce the same data set. So there are things you can do that align data management with DevOps processes. And lastly, which I think is perhaps one of my key takeaways for all of this, is it's really, really crucial to involve the business in the data process. And in our experience anyway, if you don't do that, your chances of failure in a project are much, much higher. In the situations where we've had to come in and rescue projects that have failed, catastrophically failed, like you're going to throw away 6 months of work and that sort of thing. Almost always, the problem has been that somebody has fundamentally misunderstood the business problem right at the beginning of the project. And that usually is the core of the issues. So I'll spend a minute or two in this talk. This perhaps drills down into some let's say, examples more than anything else. This is not a definitive sort of list, but just to give a couple of examples about ways that we've seen where you can measure alignment to business objectives. So on the data management side, that's probably the most well-known area. If you want to reduce the IT operation costs, you can measure that. Also, you want to reduce the business operation costs, and you can measure that as well. How much time are people spending generating reports, and how quick is it to get a report out on somebody else's script. The insight side is much more interesting, as far as I'm concerned anyway, because that's where you're starting to see the real benefits of the business. So the things that you can monitor there, if you have something like Tableau, for example, or Power BI, most people do, you can monitor usage statistics. So you can see how many people have used that report, who's used it, and is it a report that was generated by IT, or is it a report that was get some very, very accurate measures about how good your self-service implementation is and how it's going. So for us, it's crucial to measure those things and make sure that they let's say, surface upwards so that the stakeholders know that in fact this has actually generated some value to the team that's involved. And then lastly, on the advanced analytics, that's kind of harder to measure because it's very context dependent. If you have a trading desk, and the trading desk says we made 10 million because you got the decision to us in 2 hours as opposed to 5 weeks.
A little bit of noise.
So there's particular things that you can measure, but those are usually more context sensitive. A couple of anti-patterns there. Things that can derail the journey. The first one for me is insufficient SMEs, not enough business expertise, and that's the fundamental. Not adhering to the journey, which relies to many of the points that people made. That's another one. No clear KPIs, also very important to have clear KPIs. And lastly, no innovation process. I won't go through the new project process. I think most people are familiar with all of that. I've also got an example in there of incorporating different sorts of frameworks. We use an analytics framework. It's a very old one actually, CRISPR, and we integrated with Agile. I think those are fairly well known, but what's not so well known necessarily is just the point being that you can integrate new stuff with old processes like Agile, and you should. And lastly, in summary, volume and velocity. The data journey is becoming more important and it's going to continue to become more important. Structured journeys are important. And lastly, the main takeaway for me, make sure the business is involved, make sure you do it formally, make sure you set KPIs into common language. And that is about it. So thank you very much.